Many people believe the reason some people get rich and others don't comes down to salary, luck, talent, the right connections, or the right opportunity. That explanation feels simple and comfortable because it places the answer outside the individual, but there's a harder, more uncomfortable, and much less popular truth. Many people never become rich because they spend their entire lives learning how to survive financially and, without realizing it, turn that survival into a lifestyle. This process starts early. Instead of learning that money can be a tool for freedom, protection, and building something lasting, many people learn that money is for putting out fires. It's used to fill gaps, relieve pressure, solve emergencies, and buy a little peace before the next squeeze arrives. When money enters life with that function, it rarely manages to stay. Everything that comes in is already committed to the chaos left behind. The person doesn't use money to build a foundation. They use money to defend themselves. And someone who spends their entire life only defending themselves can play to win. They can only try to lose less. This is a detail that almost no one notices while they're in the middle of the struggle. Most people don't make decisions thinking about wealth, independence, or long-term peace of mind. Most are simply trying to reach the end of the month without humiliation, without surprises, without collections, without the shame of looking at their balance, without needing to ask for help again. The focus isn't growth. The focus is and it's exactly at this point that wealth begins to die before it's even born. Because no one builds something solid while living in a constant state of urgency. Even when income increases, that alone doesn't solve the problem. A person might have better months, might earn more than expected, might even experience a temporary period of breathing room. But if their mindset continues to operate like someone who feels cornered, exhausted, pressured, and always waiting for the next problem, that money won't find a place to stay. It comes in, provides relief, circulates, and disappears. Then the person looks back and concludes their financial life is just a sequence of bad luck, when in reality there may never have been mental space to build a stable relationship with money. What existed was fear of not having enough, fear of losing, fear of falling behind, fear of being judged, fear of admitting they don't know how to organize their own financial life. The cruelest part of all of this is that the pattern is usually invisible while it's happening. A person wakes up early, runs all day, works hard, tries to be responsible, pays what they can, postpones what they can't, does mental math at the grocery store, cuts one expense here, delays another there, promises that next month will be different. But nothing truly changes, and it doesn't stay the same because they are lazy, incapable, or uninterested. It stays the same because a quiet emotional poverty is slowly settling in. It's not poverty of personal value. It's a mind trained for scarcity, pressure, and constant alarm. A mind like that doesn't see money as a seed. It sees it as the day's food. It doesn't think about what can grow. It thinks about what can hold things together. It doesn't evaluate calmly. It reacts. When someone spends too long living inside scarcity, they start acting as if stability is something too distant to take seriously. This shows up in small and very common ways. It appears when a person tells themselves they deserve a treat because life is already too hard. It appears when they finance something they didn't really need because they want to feel a pleasure now that never fully arrives. It appears when they decide that saving small amounts isn't worth it. It appears when they avoid looking at their account so they don't ruin the day. It appears when they spend to compensate for the exhaustion that their own lack of control helped create. And slowly, a quiet idea is born. Building wealth is for another type of person. Someone who was born in a different reality, with a different structure, with a different starting point. While that belief becomes comfortable inside, time keeps passing. The paycheck comes and goes. Energy declines. Life continues, demanding effort, and wealth starts to look like a place reserved for a few, when in practice it is often the result of emotional discipline that almost no one was taught to develop. This is another uncomfortable truth. Many people don't fail to become rich because they don't know how to earn money. They fail because they cannot tolerate the tension of keeping money without immediately turning it into relief. Earning requires effort. Keeping requires control. Multiplying requires patience. And emotional patience is something almost no one trains. Many people can endure a boss, traffic, a heavy routine, pressure, and injustice. What they can't endure is the discomfort of seeing money sitting still, growing slowly, without producing immediate pleasure. They can't endure saying no to themselves repeatedly without receiving a visible reward right afterward. The problem is that the entire world encourages exactly this behavior. If someone is tired, they buy. If they're sad, they buy. If they're frustrated, they buy. If they worked hard, they deserve to buy. If they want to feel like they're moving forward, they buy. If they want to appear better, they buy. If they want to forget the weight of their own life for a few minutes, they buy. In this way, money stops being an instrument for building and becomes anesthesia. But financial anesthesia always charges later. The bill doesn't disappear. Fragility doesn't disappear. Dependence on the next paycheck doesn't disappear. Anxiety doesn't disappear. In fact, all of it grows quietly. That's why, for many people, having money left over never happened naturally. Because leftover money isn't just what remains after spending. In practice, it's what someone learns to protect before spending. And that difference changes an entire life. But almost no one was taught this in a truly deep way. They were told to save, but without explaining the emotional weight of living financially vulnerable. They were told to invest, but without recognizing that an exhausted mind can think about 20 years when it can barely breathe until the end of the month. They were told to earn more, produce more, grow more, but almost no one talked about how shame, comparison, mental fatigue, and social environment completely disrupt financial decisions. The environment weighs more than most people imagine. In many places, every gain must be displayed. Every improvement must become appearance. Every step forward must be consumed. Saving seems boring. Showing off seems mandatory. So when someone starts earning a little better, instead of creating distance between themselves and suffocation, they create new commitments. They upgrade their lifestyle before strengthening their foundation. They change the storefront before changing the structure. They don't do this out of malice or weakness. They do it because they're trying to buy a feeling of progress. But the feeling of progress is not progress. Looking like you've moved up is not the same as actually moving up. Spending more is not growth. This is one of the biggest illusions in ordinary financial life. People increase activity and call it progress, but life becomes more expensive, more dependent on the next inflow of money, more filled with small obligations, tighter, more vulnerable, and the fear remains there, sometimes even stronger than before, because before the person had little and knew it. Now they earn more, spend more, owe more, and fear losing the standard they created. The apparent improvement becomes a new prison. That's why so many people work harder and harder and still feel farther from wealth. Income increases, but so does the speed at which money disappears. They learn how to chase more, but not how to retain better. They try to escape lack without abandoning the urgency mindset. And this wears people down deeply. Because few things are more exhausting than working very hard and not seeing the result turn into stability. It erodes hope, it disrupts self. It makes someone start believing money simply isn't for them. That maybe wealth is a closed game, a door that doesn't open for ordinary people. At that point, many people give up without saying they've given up. They keep working, keep paying bills, keep living life, but internally abandon the idea of building something meaningful. They start thinking small, not out of humility, but out of exhaustion. And when someone gets used to thinking small as protection against frustration, they begin rejecting any movement that requires long vision, repetition, patience, and maturity. Bigger plans feel too distant. Sacrifices feel too unfair. Slow results feel useless. So they return to what provides quick pleasure, to what fits the emotions of the moment, to what relieves the weight of the day. The problem is that financial life rarely collapses because of one big cinematic mistake. Most of the time, it wears down through small emotional escapes repeated for years. An automatic expense never reviewed, an impulsive purchase after a bad week, a subscription that makes no sense, a consumption pattern trying to compensate for a void that isn't material, the habit of not looking at numbers because looking hurts, avoiding organization because organizing means admitting the size of the mess. The outcome doesn't come from one isolated act, but from the quiet sum of small concessions protected by emotion. Deep down, many people don't want just money. They want the feeling they imagine money would give them. They want peace. They want rest. They want respect. They want not to depend on anyone. They want not to feel ashamed. They want to walk into a store without doing panicked math. They want to look at the future without that heavy fog of fear. And when money starts representing all of this, it stops being just a resource and starts carrying enormous emotional weight. So any financial mistake stops being just a mistake. It becomes proof of incapacity. It becomes a wound. It becomes an intimate confirmation of failure. Over time, These repeated thoughts turn into identity. The person stops thinking I'm going through a bad phase and starts thinking I'm like this. Financial chaos stops being treated as a correctable problem and starts being treated as personal destiny. This is one of the quietest reasons many people never become rich. They internalize the chaos as part of their personality, and when that happens, any attempt at change loses strength. Because deep down, there's no longer conviction that building wealth fits their story. The social environment reinforces this constantly. There is continuous pressure to look good even when someone is sinking. Many people can't save $1,000, but feel obligated to upgrade their phone so they don't appear outdated. Many people have no emergency fund but take on expenses they can't afford just so they don't feel left out. They buy to belong, to avoid appearing smaller, to keep up with the standard of people who often are also living on appearances. This comparison drains money, emotional energy, and time, and the more someone's self-esteem depends on external signals of progress, the harder it becomes to accept the inevitable slowness of real wealth, because real wealth is quiet at the beginning. It impresses no one in the first steps. It generates no applause. It earns no quick compliments. It requires consistency when no one is watching. It requires repetition, limits, sobriety, patience. It requires tolerating the feeling of moving slowly while the world seems to run. And many people trade that quiet construction for immediate applause. They trade future wealth for present appearance. They trade real freedom for temporary belonging. And later, they pay a high price for it. Not only in money, but in exhaustion, frustration, and lost time. Time, by the way, plays a cruel role in this story. It makes no noise while it takes away the chance to build a different life. It passes in small purchases never revisited. It passes in years when someone says they'll start when the situation improves. It passes in promises made at the beginning of the year and forgotten a few months later. It passes in opportunities rejected out of fear. It passes in months when extra money came in and instead of becoming a foundation, it became consumption. It passes in phases when the body was too tired to think and the person concluded they simply weren't born to deal with finances. When they finally notice, they don't feel 1 month or 1 year behind. They feel behind in relation to their own life. That feeling hurts because it resembles a silent grief. It's not just envy of those who are doing better. It's pain over time, poorly used, energy spent, effort that didn't become stability. And that pain, instead of helping, often makes everything worse. The more behind someone feels, the more they want a quick result. The more they want a quick result, the more vulnerable they become to shortcuts, rushed decisions, empty promises, and emotional spending. Delay generates anxiety. Anxiety generates urgency. Urgency generates mistakes. And mistakes deepen the delay. That's why the answer to why many people never become rich cannot fit into a simplistic explanation. It's not only because they spend too much. It's not only because they earn too little. It's not only because they don't invest. All of that matters, but the root is usually deeper. Many people never become rich because they spend too much time trying to relieve their own pain and too little time building a foundation. Because they use money to survive emotionally. Because they never learn to tolerate the discomfort of planting without harvesting immediately. Because they confuse pleasure with progress. Because they desire the signals of wealth but not the structures of wealth. Because they are too tired to think clearly. Because they feel ashamed of starting small. Because they associate saving money with deprivation instead of protection. And there is an even more uncomfortable truth. Many people say they want to be rich, but in practice they only want to stop suffering. And those two things are not the same. Wanting to stop suffering is human, legitimate, and understandable. But that desire alone usually seeks relief. And relief does not always build wealth. Sometimes relief buys peace for a few days and pressure for several months. Sometimes relief accepts a lifestyle above what's possible because the person is exhausted from feeling deprived. Sometimes relief avoids conversations, cuts, adjustments, spreadsheets, and decisions because all of that feels too heavy for someone who is already tired. So instead of a financial project, the person creates a sequence of emotionally justifiable escapes. Each one seems small. Each one seems deserved. Each one seems understandable. And often they are. The problem isn't obvious excess. It's the accumulation. Many people's financial lives don't collapse because of major madness, but because of small leaks protected by emotion. While emotion keeps leading, reason always arrives late. That's why there comes a moment when the question needs to change. The real question is not only why haven't I become rich yet? The more honest question is, in what ways does the life I live today make it almost impossible for me to become rich in the future? That question hurts because it returns responsibility without denying the hardness of the world. Yes, life is unequal. Yes, many people start behind. Yes, the cost of living weighs heavily. Work is exhausting, and origin matters. None of that can be ignored. But even inside a hard game, there are still patterns that move a person closer to or farther from freedom. Wealth is not an accident. It doesn't come only from the amount of money that enters. It comes from the structure that receives that money. If the structure is weak, any increase in income becomes merely an increase in the speed at which money flows in and out. It's like pouring water into a bucket full of holes. The feeling of abundance appears for a moment, but the bucket remains empty. And most people spend years trying to pour in more water without realizing the real problem is the holes. Some of those holes are habits. Others are beliefs. Others are unresolved emotional wounds involving money. Others are simply the inability to tolerate the discomfort necessary to build something large. Because building wealth, for most ordinary people, is not exciting. It's repetitive. It's slow. It's quiet. And that clashes with a world where everything needs to look fast, impressive, and immediate. Real wealth grows in silence. It grows when no one is watching. It grows when a person chooses to protect part of their money instead of spending it. It grows when they decide to live slightly below what they could live in that moment. It grows when they accept looking ordinary on the outside while strengthening their foundation on the inside. But to do that, it's necessary to accept something many people avoid. Wealth requires conscious frustration. It requires tolerating not having now something you could have. It requires watching other people consume what you chose not to consume. It requires moving slowly. It requires building something that maybe no one will recognize for a long time. That frustration is exactly what separates two paths. On one side are people who use money to relieve life. On the other side are people who use money to build a life. Those who use money only for relief will always need more relief later, because the structural problem remains intact. Those who use money to build a foundation accept a period of restraint to achieve much greater freedom in the future. That doesn't mean eternal suffering or a miserable life. It means direction. It means understanding that every financial decision pushes life somewhere, even when it seems small. Wealth almost never comes from one big, isolated decision. It comes from thousands of accumulated small decisions, protecting, not giving in to every impulse, organizing before consuming, living a little below the limit, prioritizing stability before appearance. When this kind of choice starts repeating, something changes. First, the feeling changes. Anxiety decreases. Fear decreases. Small problems stop looking like catastrophes. Then the structure changes. Margin begins to exist. Savings begin to exist. Distance begins to exist between a problem and despair. And when that distance appears, something emerges that many people have never truly experienced. Clarity. A mind outside survival mode thinks better, decides better, sees opportunities that previously went unnoticed, has the courage to say no to what weakens, has the patience to wait for what's true. That's the moment when wealth stops looking like a distant concept and begins to become a real construction. Not because the person found a hidden secret, not because they discovered a magical formula, but because financial life stopped being a field of fires and became a construction site. In the end, maybe this is the most important truth of all. Many people never become rich because they spend their entire lives trying to solve anxiety with money. But wealth usually begins exactly when money stops being used to anesthetize anxiety and starts being used to build peace. This shift is quiet but powerful. And when it happens, the question stops being, will I ever manage to do this? And becomes, why didn't I start doing this sooner? If this text made sense to you, then it has already served an important purpose. Because understanding the problem is the first step to breaking the cycle. And if you made it this far, comment the word awareness. Because real financial change begins exactly there.